Many thanks again for rejoining us on the program TMI Thursday. Now we go straight to the heart of our discussion segment, and that's because the program is fully loaded. Okay, we're looking at the Nigerian economy today and the future. Where are we at in terms of the state of the economy? I remember that the present administration did propose to grow the economy by 3.5%. Each time these figures come out, for the ordinary man in the street, what they are interested in is to have their money having a high purchasing power. You hold a small amount of money and you can go to the market and buy almost all the things that you need. But that is not what it is right now. So how did we get here, and what can we do to take the country to the next level in terms of economic development? The indices on the ground are certainly not favorable, even though those in government will feel differently about it, maybe because 2019 is just around the corner. That's why today we brought two panelists on board. We're not looking at politics, we're not looking at political affiliation, but you know that everyone will always have interest in terms of politics, in terms of participation and all of that. But let's look at this issue in depth and see what we can bring out for the benefit of the viewing public. I'd like to thank very especially a former banker and the State Secretary of the African Democratic Congress. I'd like to thank very especially Idehem Bohoyi. Many thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Sonny.
I also have with us in the studio a chieftain of the AD, Alliance for Democracy. I'd like to thank very especially Osigwe Omoikiroda for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning.
Okay, so let me start with you, Idehem. Where are we now? Well, if I ask that question, it looks like maybe I haven't been in this country for a while, but because I'm asking the question, I'll let it flow. Where are we now in terms of the economy, and how did we get here?
Basically, I like a question, but if I have to answer that question, we have to look at where we were before, where we are now, based on the context in which we are asking us to have this conversation, and where we need to be. You see, if you look at, like you said, we don't really have to come here and talk about politics, whether you belong to this political party or not, but we have to speak as Nigerians. And the present narrative, which we have to explain to the people, which they have to understand, is that for every country to develop, there are so many indices we have to look at. And I would need to tell you this. You see, after God, the next thing we have to look at is natural disaster. After natural disaster, the next thing that is very prominent in our lives is politics, whether you like it or not. Because basically, when God, who is the Alpha and Omega, determines what happens to us as human beings, and after that, we talk about natural disaster, which no human being has control over. Then after that, we talk about politics. Politics will determine if you have good schools, good roads, power, good governance, policies, and all of that. So basically, every human being needs to know now that politics plays a very key role in developmental strata of any nation. Okay. And if you have to look at it from this angle, looking at post-democracy and where we are now, we talk about the military, what happened in that era, which we all know, and you look at the developmental goals that the government has had in place. We had several developmental goals set by government. And for you to set any program, the program has to be smart. One, it has to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Now, over time, we've heard of different programs that the government has set up.
Yeah.
One, you had the Vision 2010 or Vision 2020. 2020 is just some few months away. And when you set those programs, you have timelines,
yeah.
You have targets, you have things you expect to achieve. But by the time you look at the figures and the numbers, over time, irrespective of the political divide that has led us after we had our democracy. You find out that these figures are not driving. So you now ask yourself, the drivers of this economy, who happens to be the leaders that we've had over time, what are they doing? We're Nigerians, and it's not going to be rocket science. You don't need to bring somebody from space to kind of like tell you what the present situations are. And if you now have to look at the economy, there are so many factors that you use in assessing an economy. There are so many drivers. Like for instance, you look at one of the key drivers, which has to do with agriculture. You talk about education. You talk about transportation. You look at services. You look at the mining sector. You look at the manufacturing sector. You look at the power sector. You look at even entertainment, even broadcasting. They all contribute to the GDP. Those are areas that we would have to kind of like look at as the course of this conversation continues.
All right. Let me get your thoughts, Sigwe, on how we got here, arising from where we are coming from. What are your thoughts?
Okay, thank you very much to give me this opportunity of hearing my views to Nigerians. Actually, the present state of our economy is something that is very, very pathetic and scary. Because if you look from inception, from 1960 till now, as the year goes by, the country gets worse. The economic situation gets worse. 1961 was better than 1960, just thereabout. If we even just start all of recent, you can see from January here to August, which we had now, things has been getting worse. And like he has said, there are so many facets that brings about, that's taking us to this stage. And amongst them is like lack of proper planning by the leadership, by the government, lack of infrastructures, deliberate attempts not to diversify our economy, over reliance on oil wealth, and so many other things. But we still say that the leadership has a lot to do and a lot to put in place to ameliorate what we're suffering now, because Nigeria, it's not really, we are not developing at all. Because if you look at other nations, when the Americans wake up today, they see a better America. In Europe, they see a better Europe and all that. But we lack all these things. All these things elude us because of the deliberate attempt of the leadership to deny us all this for their own reasons. We don't know why, whether it's for selfish reasons or whatever. And like some school of thoughts always say that Nigerians are the problems we have because they themselves are not sincere, they are dubious and so many things. But we believe that the government regulates the citizens, and that is why we've spent taxpayers' money in feeding these people, taking care of these people, giving them even good, accessible health care. Because our leaders, once they suffer from health care, the next thing they do, they travel out and leave us, you know, in the same situation. So the people have a part to play, but the leadership of our nation has to be more proactive and has to think of better ways and sincerity to ameliorate us from what we are. We are not in a good state at all, our economy.
All right. When we hear of figures, you just wonder how they come about these figures. I mean, they have their indices, their mechanisms, and their strategies for bringing out those figures. But those figures usually do not reflect on the life of the ordinary man on the street in terms of putting food on their table. What's responsible for this?
Basically, well, figures are very good. You know, it tells you the numbers in terms of planning. You see, basically, when you talk about the economic drivers, you look at, for example, if I look at the Nigerian context, as we are today. When we had previously, what I mentioned, when we talked about those developmental programs that government had, which had nothing to do with any of the political parties that are vying for positions now. But some of the political parties had a major role to play then. You know, when I talk about post-democracy, the military coming down to
the civilian regime,
administration, which we all belong to and which we are all key players of. You find out that we have the Millennium Development Goals. We need to compare ourselves with those countries who also had this same set of programs. They took the Millennium Development Goal is a program set up by world organizations. They took that program, domesticated it in their own economy. Nigeria and China were signatories to Millennium Development Goal. And if you look at the trend of the projection, trajectory of progress of these countries compared to ours that had those same programs, their trajectory is an upward trajectory, while our own trajectory is a downward trajectory. So you now ask yourself, what is now the problem? The Chinese implemented programs, the Indians implemented programs. I'm looking at these countries based on population that had the same challenges that we had. But you see, funny enough, we need long-term planning. And every subsequent government that comes, government is continuum.
Yeah.
They need to key into that vision. And as Nigerians, when we say government, who is government? The government is the people. It's not an alien that is running governance in Nigeria. They are Nigerians like us. But what we must realize is, first and foremost, we need to get people that have the right capacity to be in governance, not people that come to lie to us. Over time, people, our leaders, have come to lie to us, basically.
Okay, you said something about the Sustainable Development Goals, which used to be called the Millennium Development Goals. You use the China, Nigeria, situation, for example. What happened? I mean, in terms of those analysis.
You see, basically, the drivers of any economy, which has to do with education,
yes,
which has to do with transportation, which has to do with financing, we have to do with mineral resources, mining, manufacturing, agriculture, education. I'll give an example. For instance, you look at services. If you look at the recent figures that they brought out for the GDP, you see in agriculture today, you find out that the last quarter of 2017 and the first quarter of 2018 and the second quarter of 2018, you find out that the report, there's a downward slide in agriculture, in as much as government is investing in that sector. Why? Because they are having security challenges. The farmers today cannot go to farms because of the herders and the farmers clash. So what does that tell you? The production line, there's a challenge in production line because why? Security. You see, funny enough, this whole thing about development, it's a chain reaction.
Yes,
you need to key all of them in. You talk about they've invested in transportation, which is also showing in an upward trend in the transportation industry. They've built some roads, but when it comes to education, you find out that the number of out-of-school children is increasing. Before it used to be about 10 million, now it's about 13.5 million. So if you look at years back, what was the figure? What was that figure as at that time? You find out the figures are increasing, and it's worrisome. You now look at, I'll give an example. Let's look at Benin City, for example. You drive on the streets of Benin, you see young children using screen wipes to clean your vehicle. At what time of the day? When they're supposed to be in school? Who's looking at those children? Who's talking about those issues? I'll tell you something. By the time those children don't go to school, they become destitute on the streets, we'll not start having security challenges. Then secondly, if you look at when I talked about the China, Nigeria
implementation of
their programs,
goals,
from the year 2000 to date, China was able to take about 460 million Chinese out of poverty. But World Poverty Clock Index has told us that as at today, we have 87 million Nigerians living below extreme poverty. Below extreme poverty. And every minute, when that report came out, every 6 Nigerians falls below extreme poverty. So basically, then you now look at our budget. For me, I think I'll be able to kind of like, sorry, I'll be raffling a little feathers here.
No, go on.
One, with all honesty, Nigeria is a poor country, but has the potentials to be a very rich country. What is the size of our budget, for Christ's sake? 9.2 trillion naira.
Yeah.
What are we investing in education? What South Africa invests in education is $21 billion in education alone. What is the size of Nigerians' budget? What is the size of the total budget in Nigeria that we talk about building roads, transportation, healthcare, talk about...
Are you saying it's small?
Very small. Then now look at our borrowings.
Yeah.
As a country, our debt position profile today is about $22.2 billion. Looking at the trend, and what are we borrowing for? Are we borrowing for recurring expenditure, or are we borrowing for capital expenditure? One, when you are borrowing for recurring expenditure, that means you would not get, because we need to look at Nigeria as an enterprise. For example, let's come closer at home. Let me break it down so that people understand. This is ITV, for Christ's sake. ITV is an organization set up to do what? To make profit. We need to unbundle Nigeria. There are so many critical sectors. If I need to take those issues, one, education is very critical, because if you do not educate the general population, that means that population will not be productive. Let me give an example. Let me particularize it. This phone is a Nokia phone. It is not owned by the Chinese company. It is owned by an American company. Your phone, your iPhone, it's an American company. Where is it produced? In China.
China, Malaysia.
Because why? They have the manpower, they have the population. But that population that does not have the education to carry out production of these products is useless.
They also have the skill.
They also have the skill.
Yeah.
Where did they get the skills from?
Education.
The schools. But today we're having 13.5 million children dropping out. And the truth of the matter is that our governments, they lie too much. We shouldn't lie to ourselves. We should come out and tell Nigerians, this is a clear and present danger. That is where leadership comes in. You see, our government will tell you today, we need to do this, we need to do that. Yes, those leaders need to drive the process properly with a clear vision. And there has to be proper communication. I've noticed that for years down the line, no proper communication. Look at China, for example. The president of China, they came out with a clear-cut policy, disciplined leadership, drove the process. I'll give an example. Let's come closer home. When we had this present administration, we looked at President Muhammadu Buhari, talked about his integrity, impeccable, came out with a statement, I belong to nobody, I belong to everybody. There was a wide ovation. Everybody was watching, waiting. What was going to happen? You could see people falling in line. But down the line, what have you been seeing? We're fighting corruption, lopsided. Lopsided.
Okay, let me just pause it for a moment. Let me bring Osigwe in. What are your thoughts in terms of dealing with these challenges? Because you blamed it squarely on leadership. What are your thoughts? Let's take, for example, agriculture has been a major talking point in terms of diversification. What are we at in terms of that as a policy? What's the level of response in terms of investment? What are your thoughts?
First of all, the government has to create that enabling environment for their policies on agriculture to thrive. Because, like he was saying, he talked about insecurity, which has affected the agricultural sector a lot.
Okay.
If you look at what is happening now, the Middle Belt is in crisis.
Yeah.
From Taraba, Benue, even parts of Nasarawa, and those are our food nations that can be able to provide us, provide an impact to our GDP. But the government has failed in almost all sectors, and that their sincerity of purpose, which they've not been able to bring into governance, is among things that giving us these worrisome problems we have.
When you say the government has failed, I mean, that's a general statement. I think the better put would be that in some areas they've done well, in some areas they haven't done well. But besides that, all of these challenges that we're talking about, they've always been part of our history. Would you reckon with that?
Yes, I do. But the same government refuses to go on continuity in governance, because when an administration comes in, they bring about policies that are supposed to ameliorate the situations on ground. But as soon as another administration comes in, they discontinue those policies and they bring their own policies. Then you now get frictions in implementing such. So if you look, for example, now they told us about the agricultural revolution, having yams, beans and everything, but the exports they did, they were all rotten, they were refused by the nations they were exported to. So these are issues we have to look into. And security is very, very key. The government has to make a decisive effort in putting an end to the herdsmen and the farmers' clashes, because this thing is going unabated. Even in Benue, like 8 people were killed just yesterday. This is a continuous process. So the government has to be sincere. They have to look at what areas to tackle this. And like you rightly said, it's a chain reaction, because by the time you start to tackle the basic amenities which Nigeria needs, almost every other thing will fall in place. Because even in the agricultural sector, we need a lot of energy, we need a lot of power to make it work. And what efforts have the government put in place to diversify our sources of energy? We can't keep relying on hydroelectric and fossil plants to power our electricity. They are ordered. We have lots of coal in Enugu. We have lots of wind at Sokoto. We have so many things that we have the sun. So these are ways we can diversify our energy. And once we start putting all these things into place, it starts falling in. Nigerians become less hungry on the streets. Nigerians starts having job. In just three years, we've saw 18% of Nigerians losing their jobs. So these are things that governments, even as much as they say, okay, these are the problems we've identified that can work out, we need to start putting all those things in place. Have a proper educational policy, see through to it, have a good teachers' welfare scheme. You start equipping our schools with laboratories, research centers, and all this. Nigerians is so sad that we've not even looked beyond our revenue in the next 10 years. And of course, where we are getting this thing from is going to dwindle. And if you look at these herdsmen and farmers' clashes, if we continue like this, in the next 4 or 5 years, we cannot be able to provide food that will feed us. So these things cause a lot of chain reaction. So what we have to do, the government has to make that concerted effort, bring about orientation of its citizens, that they should start being their brother's keeper, because those are one of the things that have caused our problems. See Mr. A and Mr. B fighting over land, over unnecessary issues. These were not done when we were younger. When we were young, we saw children, we never knew how it was, we never knew what our parents paid as school fees. But today is a problem. Schools are about to resume, every parent is on panic mode. You understand? You go to schools, you see children thrown out. So all these things it's imperative. We have to address them squarely with sincerity and commitment.
Well, that just struck me. I mean, schools are about to resume. Parents are on panic mode. You want to say something to that?
What that portends is this, like you just rightly mentioned. You see, when we're growing up, I went to a public school. Did you go to private school?
I went to a public school too.
Did you go to private school?
Yeah, I went to private stroke public school.
When you went to primary school, where did you go to?
I went to Uniben demonstration.
How much was the fees there?
I
So they're taking money away from the middle class. Every September, the panic button triggers. You need to pay school fees across the nation. You see, basically, like you just said, you see, like I keep saying, they are key drivers of any economy. We don't need to bring in eggheads because we belong to a political party and say, because we have this leader, I need to patronize my follower. Get people that have the right capacity, intellectual capacity to man these positions. You see, the average Nigerian does not know what GDP is. Or the average
He's not even interested.
He doesn't even know. But we bother ourselves too much on a lot of shenanigans. Today, you hear this is affecting from A to B. We bother ourselves about that. We need to talk about governance. Let's leave politics. We've spent so much time on politics. Let's talk about governance. Govern the people. They are indicators. It's not rocket science. We have a small budget of about 9.2 trillion naira. And we are borrowing to fund that budget. If we're going to borrow to fund that budget, how do we spend those resources? In simple economics, that's what we call scale of preference. We need to prioritize what we spend on that would stimulate the economy. Beautiful enough, not everything that this government has done is totally bad. They've invested in transportation, which you have seen in the report that they brought out recently.
Yeah.
Transportation has
Gone up.
in terms of road. But we still need to do more. That's why I said we're a poor country. Look at our budget. How much is our budget? South Africa is spending $21 billion, and our budget is not three times of Nigerians' budget on education alone in 1 year.
Just patronage 7%.
What has Nigeria spent on education for the past number of years?
It has been declining every year.
South Africa has spent on just 1 year. Look at all these developing countries.
So what do you make of all of these?
The thing is we need to get our policies.
They thought that Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa.
See,
because you keep making reference to South Africa.
When you say largest economy in Africa, you see, we are too political in this country. What is the value of our stock exchange? What is the value of our capital market?
You tell me.
The value of our capital market is about $44 billion. And 2 months ago, $7 billion left. Why? Because of our toxic political nature. Uncertainty. Investors pulled out $7 billion out of the market. If you compare that capital market to the South African capital market, South African capital market, the value is about $900 and something billion.
So we are not on the same scale. We're not on the same level.
We're not.
Okay.
You see, basically, we need to come out as a country. Our leaders need to come out as a country and tell us this is where we are, so that the people would know that these are the challenges we are facing, so we can move together as a country, as a nation, knowing that these are the challenges we are facing. These are what we are trying to do. This is how we intend to do it. And by the time you do those things, you come out with figures, telling the people, communicating to the people, so the people will have a direction. But as of today, nobody is talking. You have a president that cannot even when was the last time the president spoke to us as a people?
But his aides are talking to us.
We didn't vote
the
for
Minister for Information.
I heard the spokesman, the spokesman, what's his name?
Special Advisor Media, Special
Advisor Media, Femi Additional, saying that is the style of the president. Well, he's liable to his own opinion. We didn't vote for special advisor. We voted for a president. You see,
but that was why
if you look at the Nigerian context, Nigeria as a people, and looking at our sociocultural being, we like our culture. We like to
communicate.
Hear from the person who is the boss. And who is the boss? Buhari. He needs to speak to the people. There are issues that he needs to address. He needs to talk to the people. When you talk to the people, it gives a lot of confidence. You need to give the people hope. We're not seeing hope.
Okay, let's proceed there. We're just on the verge of concluding our first discussion today, the Nigerian economy today and the future. Our guest, Osigwe Omoekiroda, an AD chieftain, and of course the State Secretary of the African Democratic Congress, Idehe Mbohoi. Gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining us. Okay, we have looked at where we are coming from, where we are right now. As we conclude now, how do we get out of the woods? How do we turn things around for this country so that the abundance, the wealth of this nation will actually affect people? I mean, just watching on television this morning, seeing 2 old men crying like babies as a result of floods that have ravished their houses. I was particularly pained. I'd like to get your thoughts. What can we do to change the narratives?
Basically, to change this narrative lies in us, the electorates, the people, because we have been deceived for this long by those that have led us. So what we need to start doing is to start making ourselves as alternative to governance. When we mean making ourselves as alternatives to governance, not basically on the mantra of not too young to run, but at least we ourselves, because these politicians, they place a lot of orders on us for we to be able to go into electoral or elective positions. So once we start making ourselves alternatives, we'll continue to be in this problem, because we've been facing this thing over the years. And if we should be right and if we should be sensible to ourselves, there is no changes that is going to come any moment soon, because from indices, from statistics, from precedents, it is getting worse every day. So the only way is for we to change this same cabal that has been able to put us in this state, which is to their own selfish interest, that they wouldn't want us to leave this state so they can be able to continue to create more for their dynasty. So if we do not start making an alternatives ourselves, start profiling ourselves, start coming out, bringing out the best within ourselves, and we shun most of all these politics these politicians have been giving to us, buying of votes, you know, deceiving us, using our youths as thugs and all that, and we start saying, yes, we can. We ourselves, we believe we've gone to school.
So you're saying that the narratives will change when the people take ownership of the process.
Exactly.
All right.
This old order has to go.
All right.
That's the only way.
The old order has to go.
Yes, they cannot. They are non-functional leadership. This recycled non-functional leadership has to put an end to it, and it's only we that can do that.
All right.
Nobody else.
Well, basically for me, the narrative has to be, we need to have a direction. We need to have people that can drive our economy, our policies, people that drive our policies. We have very good policies, but we implement those policies. What are the drivers of those policies? You and I need to agree as a people and say, yes, this is the direction we need to go. You see, basically, I agree with my friend here, Osigwe, who has said we've not had proper leaders who could drive this process. And we live in the 21st century, for Christ's sake. India, for example, derives so much from what? From services that increases their GDP. Those services has to do with what? Technology.
Yeah.
Where's your server that you use here for your internet, your server? Where's it from? Is that from Israel or from India? That is exported services. They get so much revenue from it. So education, we need to invest on these critical areas. Okay. And we need to be sincere. I'll give an example. For instance, Edo State, since 2015, Edo State has been unable to access UBEC funds. And UBEC funds is for what?
Education. Basic education.
So what does that tell you? So basically, and secondly, we need to be sincere as government. You see a situation where they tell you, Red Roof Revolution. Red Roof Revolution, beautiful. But how much was used in a 6-block classroom to renovate a 6-block classroom?
That's accountability now.
That's accountability.
Transparency.
How much? You see, the figures are there, 25 million. Would you, Sonny Duke, renovate a 6 if you are a private owner? The other day, the president of Ghana was in Nigeria. He was invited for an MBA program that was organized by the MBA on the way forward for African countries. Okay. And he asked a very simple question. And he said, in his words, how come the private sector will build a school for XYZ amount of money, and the government will build the same school for quadruple times XYZ amount of money? So it's a worrying challenge. The roads, we borrow to build infrastructure. Fine, it's good. Even every developing country borrows to do that. Yeah. But those infrastructures would, at the long run, stimulate the economy. Yeah. But what we must begin to ask ourselves is, at what cost are we building those roads? If you come to the petroleum sector, this government has not been sincere. First and foremost, government is paying subsidy. Are you aware of that? Do you know the landing cost of fuel as at today? The landing cost of fuel as at the time I checked was 171 naira a litre. Today, it's only NNPC that imports fuel in this country. The private sector, the people that used to import fuel, the private, you need to open up the market. They're not doing that. Why? Because they're looking at politics. Because if they decide to increase the price of fuel, if the landing cost is 171 naira, and how much are you buying it? 145. It is wrong. They're supposed to the cost of fuel is supposed to be above 171 naira as of today. But they would not do it. Do you know why? Because it's an election year.
Okay. Sorry, let me just buttress on what I was trying to say. When we're trying to say governments getting their priorities right. For example, since I've been touring around Edo State on political activities, I've seen some C4 roads being done by World Bank and the government. And those C4 roads, they are not, the cost estimate is not much. It's maybe about, they're about like 30 million naira for the less than 1 kilometer road. Now, these roads are done for about 30 million naira. And these roads, at least 160 people are employed to clean this 1 kilometer road. And those people are paid the minimum wage of 18,000 naira. And they are to be paid for 1 year. After 1 year, they will disengage them from their service. Now, you can see the government has not set their priority right. You've built a road for 30 million, and you're spending another almost 30 million to give people to sweep this road. And these people are political stooges to these leaders or whatever, because they come in multiple names. The balance, the essence of that money used for that could have been used to extend these roads, or could have been used to provide other social facilities for the people that they are doing. So you see, that is why I came to that I said at the end of the day, the electorate needs to take ownership of the process. People are not sincere. They are not committed. The solutions are there.
Our time is up.
Before the electorate needs to take position of all these things, the electorate need to be educated. They don't know most of these things. So we need to use this medium
to educate them. All right, gentlemen, thank you for your time. But I just want to respond to an issue that you raised, where you say these leaders, they are not sincere. I think that's relative. Let's establish that. And just to also say that views expressed here are entirely those of the ones expressing them. They are not the views of the station. I want to thank you guys again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.